Kroll was born on April 17th, 1933, the sixth of 9 children. His family lived in Upper Silesia in the far east of Germany until they got driven out at the end of the Second World War.
Joachim Kroll was the son of a coal miner, born in East Germany, weakly, unprepossessing child, barely intelligent. He had an IQ of 79.
Man lebte in sehr beengten räumlichen Verhältnissen.
They lived in very cramped circumstances. Only 2 rooms for a family of 11, always in financial difficulties.
Und auch das Verhältnis
And also his relationship with the family weighed heavily on him because he was hardly able to develop any kind of close relationship with his siblings.
zu seinen Geschwistern aufbauen konnte. Joachim Kroll
was lonely in his own family because he learned that he didn't matter much as a human.
als Mensch nicht so sehr gezählt wird.
He didn't experience any motherly or fatherly love at home and therefore couldn't develop a feeling of self-worth.
Selbstwertgefühl für die eigene Person.
He was withdrawn and shy.
Gar nicht entwickeln. War immer sehr
He was afraid to even
schüchtern
speak
und hatte
because he was
Angst,
physically
überhaupt
abused.
mitzuteilen, weil es dann Strafen gab.
He was a bit of a victim, a bit of an outcast, even within his own family. And then when he went to school, he didn't really fit in there either. He had quite a low IQ. He wasn't particularly bright. He was a bit slow. So that made him a bit of a target there. And then later on, he was drafted into the Hitler Youth. You know, perhaps his father thought this was a way of sorting him out and making him, you know, a real man. But that didn't really work out either because he didn't fit in with that particular culture. So here's somebody who's always been something of an outsider, somebody who doesn't always fit in, who isn't really accepted anywhere.
Als die Rote Armee kam,
When the Red Army came, all the Germans were driven out, and for the Kroll family, it was an odyssey, because they went from place to find another home somewhere. Kroll had to watch women being raped, people being killed, how small boys played with explosives and blew themselves up in the process. So, as a young man, Joachim Kroll had already been badly traumatized.
junger Mann stark traumatisiert worden.
You have to bear in mind that Joachim had always been teased and bullied. Even in his own family, he was always the loser. When one of them did something, his siblings would always say Joachim did it, so he would be beaten again.
There's quite a few pieces of the jigsaw puzzle falling quite neatly into place here for Kroll. So he started off life as an outsider, not really got many decent social relationships. He's quite isolated, and he's somebody who is becoming increasingly introverted, and that's always a dangerous thing.
While working on farms as a teenager, Kroll was regularly beaten by his superiors whenever he made a mistake.
He went to work on a farm, quite a tough environment. He didn't get on particularly well socially in this environment. He worked with people on the farm. This included women who he would make inappropriate passes at because he just didn't have the social skills to form normal relationships with the opposite sex. He was quite aggressive in his approach to them. So he was often rejected by the women that he would try and develop relationships with. And I think that served to just isolate him even further.
During his time on the farm, Kroll also developed a morbid fascination with the butchery of animals.
Back in those days, slaughtering animals on farms isn't the kind of cold, clinical approach that's taken today. It was incredibly brutal, it was incredibly bloody. He wasn't repulsed by these scenes of gore and blood and violence that other people might be.
Als zum ersten Mal das Schlachten eines Schweines beobachtet.
When he saw a pig being slaughtered for the first time, it had a lasting effect on him. He started sweating, his pulse was racing. It was basically a very positive and almost ecstatic experience that he didn't expect to feel. He was completely overwhelmed by these sensations that were totally unknown to him.
In die unvermindert hineingeschleudert wurde, weil Joachim Kroll so etwas ja vollkommen fremd war.
So he's a bit different, and he's developing a tolerance to violence and to death.
Kroll's delight in the blood and gore of the slaughterhouse even manifested into sexual acts with animals.
in der Pubertätzeit, und war in der Pubertät, als bei den Bauern war.
If fantasies of sexual violence developed during puberty, and he was in puberty, when he was working on farms, then you can never get rid of them. There he experienced these sexual things which aroused him, the warm blood, and where he satisfied himself. Then afterwards he lived out his fantasies on the animals, with sexual acts, with cows and anything that was available. And something like that will never go away.
When we look at sex, we look at what is it? What does it represent? Essentially, it represents power. Now, here's somebody who hasn't had a lot of power, who hasn't had a lot of control over the things that have been happening in his life. But when he's involved in the slaughtering of animals, he's fully in control in this situation. And this is something that he quite enjoys. It's the first time, I think, in his life that he's got control over what's going on.
Kroll's fantasies translated into behavior that was becoming more and more grotesque.
When he lived in a hostel for single men and he took a cat into his room, he had this idea that he wanted to see what the insides looked like.
He took a hammer, struck the cat and skinned it, and took a closer look at its intestines.
And that really does show this kind of childlike curiosity that he's got and the complete lack of boundaries around how to behave appropriately.
His violence towards animals took a more human-like turn when Kroll began experimenting with blow-up dolls.
Weil Kroll keinen Zugang zu Frauen
Because Kroll didn't manage to get access to women, he procured himself several rubber dolls instead, which he draped with clothing, but then also hanged them with a rope and imagined that the women would then die. He got a particular kick out of that.
Das gab für ihn dann den besonderen Kick.
It was only a matter of time before Kroll's perverse behavior would lead him to kill. When he was arrested 3 days